So this month is the 3rd anniversary of our launch, which is pretty amazing. Oh, Zina! In May of 2019, we welcomed Krista Tippett, who's the host of On Being, to Barrington to help us kick off this series to explore how to foster greater inclusion and belonging in our community. At the time, we called it a year of courageous conversations. But then we kept gathering and we kept learning together. And over the last 3 years, over 1,000 people have signed up to join our monthly conversations, listen to our podcast, participate in fellowship cohorts, facilitate dialogues, join book clubs and racial healing circles, and taking field trips. Also, some of these people have stepped up to lead activities around our community to build a more inclusive future where everyone belongs. So a huge round of applause to all of you. Thank you so much. Over the last 3 years, we have really been so fortunate to welcome some of the best minds across the country on how to build communities of belonging. And it feels like divine timing that we are marking this anniversary tonight with a special guest whose book was blurbed by 3 of our past speakers, Krista Tippett being the first, Ibu Patel of Interfaith America, and Valerie Carr. So welcome, Reverend Jennifer Bailey. Thank you so much for being here tonight. The team has been really anticipating this and looking forward to this for a really long time. So we're so happy that you're here, Jen. Thank you so much for being here. Dom, come on in. My husband, everybody. Okay, before we dive into tonight's conversation, we want to share something special with you before we announce it publicly. And we're very excited about this announcement. On Wednesday, September 14th, our usual second Wednesday evening, we are welcoming a special guest to Barrington. Soccer icon, World Cup champion, and Olympic gold medalist Abby Wambach. You might know Abby from her New York Times best-selling book, Wolfpack, which we heard Brene Brown say recently is one of her favorite leadership books of all time, so it must be true. You might also know Abby from the popular podcast We Can Do Hard Things, hosted by her wife, Glennon Doyle. A courageous leader both on and off the field, Abby is a beautiful voice for equality and inclusion, and we're so excited to welcome her to Barrington. So that's a big thing for courageous community. We'll be hosting her and anyone who wants to come and see her at Barrington High School's Johnson Auditorium. And based on the wildly enthusiastic response from a few local soccer fans we've talked to, we have a hunch that this might be a favorite. So we want you, as courageous community participants, to grab your seats early before fans scoop them up. And this event will kick off a new campaign to celebrate belonging in our community. And we really want you and your families to be there. All ages are welcome. So Claire tells me to say, here's how it will work. We will email you the link to register before we open ticket sales to the public. So please watch for an email from us and click that link when you get it and hold September 14th on your calendar. And if for some reason you don't get emails from us, find our website and sign up for our emails. Then stay tuned for more fall programming in October. We're very excited for Barrington's White House, a special partnership with the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Educational Center, which will include programming right here at the house. Thanks in some effort from my mama, too. I just want to give her a little nod there. And then December 14th, we're thrilled to welcome Stephanie Land, whose book Made was turned into the popular Netflix series based on her life story. So she'll be here in December. Again, we were so excited when that show came out. We tried to get her for this year, but she was in popular demand. So December, she said, December. Okay, we can wait. So because it's our last session tonight, before we break for the summer, we want to acknowledge some among us who have gone the extra mile. Many of these people are very important to our community and therefore important to us to acknowledge. We want to thank Cynthia Armendariz Maxwell, who is retiring as principal of Sunny Hill Elementary. From day one, Cynthia has signed up, extended invitations, tweeted to spread the word, been a guest, and all of the things. Thank you, Cynthia. We wish you so well. And yes, you still can stay connected as part of our community, right? Abigail Bergen, thank you for your deep commitment to this series as a loyal fellow, facilitator, and fantastic question asker from the jump. We are so excited for your next chapter at Duke University. Congratulations. We have a few fellows who are here tonight. Stephanie Blatchley, Sam Adams-Lanham, Stephanie Gates. Who else? There's Elaine, Jeannie. Anybody else that I can't see or I'm missing? Tamara. Where's Tamara? Tamara? Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge our fellows. They came with us on our journey our very first year on the test drive of Courageous Conversations, I'd like to say it, and gave wonderful feedback. So a big round of applause for our fellows. Thank you for still being with us. I did want to make a special note to fellow Stephanie Gates. You have journeyed with us from day one, all the way from Chicago, first making a multi-hour round-trip commute each month, twice, because as fellows, we met twice a month. Then hanging with us virtually, writing and publishing beautiful essays, and volunteering to facilitate racial healing circles, and continuing conversations outside of our monthly gathering, which we are so grateful for. Your friendship and your partnership and your growing relationship. Your feedback has been invaluable to us, so thank you. You can get seconds if you need seconds now, because I'm still going. We want to thank Uber Community Connectors and wonderful partners in this work, Sam Adams-Lanham at Barrington Area Library and Kyle Kick at Be Strong Together. And another community partner who's here tonight, Betsy Weintringer from Barrington Youth and Family Services. There are many people who take education very seriously. Janet Anderson, Kathleen Duffy, Bridget Tileston, Lori Ford, Kelly Harridan, Brian Turcott, Michelle Acosta, Graham Kostick, and Nate Rouse, who have been along with us on this journey and who are doing wonderful work in our community. Volunteers who helped us with our program survey, Susan Padula and Caroline, Robin, and Patience. Thank you so much. And everyone who helps capture and communicate these gatherings each month. JP Leong, who's in the back, JP wave. JP travels from Cincinnati every month to be with us. Linda Barrett, thank you for your beautiful photography. Tamara Tabell, thank you for capturing key takeaways for us. I know it's not easy to summarize the things that we talk about. Ed Bordenstein, thank you for sound engineering our podcast. Liz Luby, Lisa Stamos, and Rachel Kuna have all helped spread the word to our community through their media outlets. All of our friends at Barrington's White House, and this is really huge. Beth, Rollin, Connor, Mary, Kate, Clancy, and anyone else I have not mentioned, thank you for your warm hospitality each month. It's been a pleasure to be in partnership with you. And all of our friends who have sponsored this series, Young Chung, Elaine Sambo-Reither, Carol and David Nelson, Dennis and Stacy Barsima, Kim Duchessois, Kobe and Eric Struckmeyer, Tyler and Danielle Lenchuk, and Dominic Green, and BMO and Barrington Area Community Foundation. Thank you so much for helping to support this program. I'm turning the corner. I'm rounding the bend. We have been fortunate to learn from so many amazing guest speakers and podcast guests who have brought their wisdom and passion from right here in our community. Actually, Sarah was our guest a couple of months ago, and she came back. We're so excited to have her here. Thank you for coming. Including also Joy Wagner at Neurobalance Center, Raphael Malpica and Jean Eng from Healthier Barrington Coalition, Nancy Gianni at Gigi's Playhouse, Michelle Acosta at the Early Learning Center, Rebecca Darr at Wings, Terrence Wallace from the InZone Project, and Jason Altman at Harper's College. These are just a few, but all of this wisdom resides right here in our community, and I really want to acknowledge all of that talent that we can tap. So thank you to all of the people who have been guests here. And we can't wait to lift up more local stories in the coming year, so watch your email for that too. Opportunities to nominate people who merit greater exposure for their work to foster belonging here. So one more time, can you please join me in thanking all of you and all of these people that we've mentioned through your words and actions, not just in this room, but after we all leave and go out into the world, which is really the most important part. We are seeing over and over again that when we lean into courageous conversations with curiosity, humility, generous listening, patience, and hospitality, we are each a part of building a community where everyone belongs. So here's to you.
I like the way this is written, her first book, like that. To my beloveds, Letters on Faith, Race, Loss, and Radical Hope was published by Chalice Press just last year. And lucky for us, there's a table full of them. I bought 7, you better hurry up, I want more. I was trying to be kind. And that she is here with us. Claire is a beautiful writer, and she wrote all of that? Yeah. She did. But here's what I know from knowing people who know Jen, because I do not know her well, is that she is a fierce defender of your space to have ideas and a fierce advocate of holding us accountable to the kind of thinking that builds and expands and is generative. She is the kind of person that by her presence makes space available that we might all be changed. There is deep blessing in this room tonight because she is with us. So I invite Jen to come, and my colleague and my friend, Jessica, please. So in the book, the poor man sitting next to me on the plane was trying to figure out why I was snotting and crying. And I decided it was too short a flight. Didn't get into it. In the book, you talk about your family being a family of the prairie state, our state.
Yeah.
And you were born in a community that did not create space for Black girls and boys to flourish, and your parents moved. Where did you start? Not the name of the place, but where did you start? Where did you go? And what shifted for you in that beginning?
Thank you for that question. And thank you all so much for having me. It's good to be home. Thank you. It really is. You know, I grew up in a community in this state. Listen, it's in the book. So I grew up in a town called Quincy, Illinois, which is in west central Illinois, about 40,000 people on the banks of the Mississippi River. Grew up there during the 90s and early 2000s. And what is true about Quincy is that it is a place that kind of feels like it's stuck in the waves of the past, even though time is pushing it forward. And it was not a space. My parents moved there when I was 2 from the south side of Chicago. My dad was born and raised on the south side. My mom was from Cairo, Illinois, which I could tell you all about Cairo, which is a fascinating place. And they went to Quincy when I was 2 because they got jobs and they had just graduated from grad school and they thought they were going to be there for 2 years. My dad just moved last year, right? As those stories go. But Quincy as a community, at the time I was growing up there, was 90% white and 10% the rest of us. And so now, looking back, I can have more compassion than I did growing up, because I'm not sure that they knew what to do with me in my public school space. When kids started to tease me and tell me that I was dirty because my skin was brown, I don't know that there were tools that were available to the teachers and the folks in the community to understand how to wrestle with that. we were an odd duck. I was, I had two college-educated parents. We lived on the other side of town. They didn't know what to do with middle-class Black folks in this community, where there was an assumption of class status because of the color of one's skin. And I think my parents they saw a ceiling in terms of my ability to see myself, period. And so they moved me back to Chicago, where I gratefully went to Whitney M. Young Magnet High School, go Dolphins, and was for the first time in a space that I had teachers who were Black and brown and Asian American, and I was in the majority at the time, at 30%. It was one of the most diverse high schools in the United States. And that blew open for me a new way of understanding myself as valuable, as smart, as someone that had potential in a community that had previously had a limited imagination around what Black girls could do. There was an assumption that I would be pregnant by 16 and out of the school system, right? Because that's what happened to little Black girls in Quincy when I was growing up. So, yeah, I never shy away from naming the place.
Okay.
And I love that place, right? I do, because it helped shape me, inform me, and it was in that place at Bethel AME Church that the church mothers formed me and shaped me, and against the waves of negativity told me that I was beloved in the eyesight of God. And so I'm always going to have some allegiance to or understanding of myself as being in relationship to that place. So thank you for asking the question.
Okay, Jen, so before COVID, when we all lived a different life, some of our Courageous Community Fellows had plans in motion to host a People Supper, which is your, idea, and we were really inspired by it. However, because of COVID, we couldn't meet in person anymore, and so that idea kind of stalled. So when we had the opportunity to, think about being together again, the idea of having a People Supper together was really inspiring. So thank you for being the originator of that with your colleague Lennon Flowers. Can you share the origin story of how the People Supper came to be for us, and give us an idea of some places where these suppers have been held?
Yeah, absolutely. So the People's Supper was born on a stretch of highway between Memphis, Tennessee, and Little Rock, Arkansas, on I-40.
So it was one of those road trip, like rain.
It was about a week after the 2016 presidential election, and I was feeling in a state of deep despair for a number of reasons. Not just the outcome of the election, which not everybody was sad about that. It was more of a feeling of deep lament and grief about the state of our country at that point. And this sense in my gut that the rhetoric and discourse of volatility and vitriol that we had heard this was not the end of it. I wish I wasn't right. And so in that place on I-40 between Memphis and Little Rock is a little town called Hughes, Arkansas, which is where my grandmother is from.
Okay.
And so as I was driving through Hughes, I was thinking about the story of my own people, my own family, and their journey from escaping the terror of the Jim Crow South to the south side of Chicago to where I was sitting that day. And I knew that there was a possibility of something different, that the news that we saw, that the stories that we tell ourselves about the limitations of our possibilities for this country weren't true. And so I called my friend Lennon, who is a dear friend and colleague. She runs an organization called the Dinner Party that does work with 20 and 30-somethings who've experienced loss, usually the loss of a loved one. And I said, I feel like there's a lot of people grieving right now. What can we do together to apply some of the methodologies that the Dinner Party's been using for years to a civic state? And Lennon was like, all right, I'm game. And then we called our friend Emily May, who is the executive director of a project it was formerly Holler Back. It's now called Right to Be, which does work around anti-harassment work. And Emily is just a genius with marketing and communications. And so we co-founded the People's Supper as a project called 100 Days, 100 Dinners. And our goal initially was to do 100 dinners over the first 100 days of the Trump administration as a way of bringing people together across lines of difference to see if we could actually engage one another again in civil dialogue and civic spaces. we thought it was going to be 100 days, and now, years later, we've done these suppers in libraries and in people's homes. We've done these conversations in city halls. We've done these conversations in church basements and synagogue basements. And so what's been really beautiful about the project and its evolution over the years is that people have really taken up the mantle of the People's Supper and applied it to their own context. And I think that is the best of the work that we can do. If we can put it out in the world so that people can take it and run with it and make it their own, that is the sign of an idea whose time has come.
I'm really curious to know who attended a supper at a city hall.
That is great. So the city of Erie, Pennsylvania, took on the People's Supper as a project because I think it was 2017, they were voted the worst place in America for African Americans to live, which did not sit well with the one Fortune 500 company in town, Erie Insurance, because you're trying to recruit people into your town. It's not good if you have a USA Today article out there saying it's not a hospitable place to live. And so our friends at Erie Insurance, together with the mayor's office, brought the People's Supper in to do a series over the course of 2 years to bring together community stakeholders across. We had a group of new Americans, we had a group of Black folks and Latino folks and white folks who were in conversation with one another, asking a core question, which was, why do you call Erie home? And what would it look like to create a more inclusive community where everybody sees themselves as part of a future here? And so that group of 40 folks gathered together in city halls and in different community centers over the course of 6 months. And the culmination was this big public summit that they did that introduced the city's first Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council. They started dreaming about things like scholarship funds and funds for new minority-owned businesses and enterprises. And so that's just one example of how folks took, a little idea like breaking bread and having supper and made it their own thing in a really beautiful way.
But first of all, amazing. Second of all, what I find really fascinating is that they took it and made it a long experience, because from at least my experience with doing some of this work here is that it takes a lot of time to build trust. It takes a lot of time to unpack some of my stuff, to be able to take on some of your stuff, and that they had the wherewithal. I mean, did you suggest that?
We did, because we found after the first
good.
year of the People's Supper, of that big number, 1,000 happened in the first year. And what we found was that people were taking it on and doing it and never reconnecting again. And there's a difference between having, I'm going to be real. Can I be real?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I think for a lot of folks that were really anxious to stamp their passport to say they had had dinner with somebody who's Muslim, or to say they had had dinner with somebody who was a new American, but weren't necessarily invested in thinking about the way to change our community so everybody felt a sense of belonging. And so we actually pivoted pretty hardcore from a model of scalability that was do more, to saying go deep, deep, deep. And so encouraging folks, rather than just doing a one-off event, although those are great, they serve their purposes, to really thinking about what it would look like to gather over a period of time the same group of people and one's community in order to begin to develop those bonds of trust that would then lay the groundwork for social change in their community.
I am struck with the fact that you say this was born out of a place of lament. And I know in your book you talk about public lament. You talk about the keening women in the Hebrew Bible in the book of Jeremiah. But the comment that you make is that the act of public lamentation is therapeutic when the weight of what is on you is too much for the individual, this public lament. Why do you think that? What happens in public lament? Because it's, again, messy. And once you open it, so.
I think you're not alone. And one of the greatest dangers I see in our communities these days is this deep isolation, and particularly coming as we move into whatever this next phase of the pandemic is, there's a real sense that when you're isolated, when you're alone, it weighs more heavily on you. You think that you don't have anyone who can help you carry that weight. So what public lamentation does, I think, is let people to release and know that they're being held by one another. And so that has been, in my own experience, I grew up in the Black church, the church. And so for us, when people are in church and they are weeping and they are wailing and they are releasing unto both a higher power, but it's also being held by the community, right? There's always those like usher ladies who come with the fan and the sheets, and the sheets to make sure if you're wearing a skirt that certain things don't get seen, right? There are people who are like, who lift you up, literally, physically, might lift you up and go pray with you, right? And so for me, having been raised in that context and being shaped in that context, I don't know how to carry grief if not with others. And there are a whole lot of people grieving in this season. So on the one hand, there's the element of public lament, but I think for me, a lot of that is also formed by personal loss and my own experience of the death loss of, at a relatively young age, of my mother, of close friends. And it shapes your heart. When you lose someone you love, it reshapes the very fabric of your heart. And knowing that I could lean on folks during that moment, that knowing that I had a community that would help me literally stand when I couldn't stand on my own, when I was on the kitchen floor wailing, right? That's the best of us. That's the best of our human nature. It's the best of relationships, when we can show up and be present for one another in the midst of our suffering and not leave and not get scared, but just be in it and not try to fix. Because I think that's another thing that we get socialized into. We feel like we need to fix folks who are grieving or fix challenges that people have, when the greatest gift that we can give is really the ministry of presence.
It's been 6 years since the launch of the People's Supper. There's been some isolation for you in that. You wrote a book, you had a baby. There's a lot. Max.
Yes.
What's changing for you? How are you evolving?
That's a great question. It's funny, there's folks in this room who've known me a long time, so I'm curious how they would answer that question. Amber, Tony. Motherhood does something to you.
Amen.
It really does. It is a joyful, exhausting pain in the butt. This last weekend was really tender for me with Mother's Day. My mom died on the day before Mother's Day in 2016. And so it's always a complicated time for me. And my grandmother, her mother, passed away last August. So this is the first Mother's Day I've had without anybody to pick up the phone and call in my, at least, direct familial line. And there's been something about the experience of being vulnerable enough to know that I miss my mama. And learning how to mother without the mothers in my life who shaped me, that has cracked open a particular type of both vulnerability within me, and I just can't fake the funk anymore, y'all, because I'm exhausted. Right? Like, I think sometimes, even in spaces like these, there's a temptation to, present Jen Bailey, right?
Well,
ladies and gentlemen, Jen Bailey.
Right, or Reverend Jen.
Reverend, not Rev, Reverend.
Yes, the
Yes.
Reverends that talks like this and says amen, and I'm just too tired, y'all. And then partially because my baby only started sleeping, he's now 19 months, only started sleeping through the night, totally without wanting to nurse 2 weeks ago. And so I'm like, wait, my body still hasn't adjusted to not waking up at 3 a.m. And so I think that there is something, and that is moving within me as I'm being transformed in this relationship with this tiny tyrant who is amazing, but a tyrant. That is opening the wells of my heart to recognize my own limitations.
Oh my.
And lean more heavily on both like sister friends who have me, who I know have me in my group chat, when folks who've known me since I was 14, but also like trusting my team at Faith Matters Network that they got it too, because you know what? Trying to bring a baby into the world during a global pandemic when daycare gets shut down every 2 weeks because there's a new case, I just can't like have it together anymore because my kid's gonna be running in the background, right? And so it has me thinking a lot about how we cultivate communities of belonging that are grounded in a sense and ethic of care. And not just in sort of a loosey-goosey way, but like, how do we reform our institutions that allow us to bring the fullness of ourselves so that I can be both Reverend Jen when I need to be, but also I can be like Christine's lamenting baby, and I can be Max's mommy, or mama. He has mama down very well. This is my tiny tyrant. Yesterday is developing two-word sentences now, and so he woke up and he was playing in my room because he has a little play area in my room. I was reading on my phone and trying to go like at least doze a little bit more. He started poking me and said, "Mama up, mama up. We got cars to play with," which is also a reminder to me like, "Mama up. We got stuff to do," right? Like, even in the exhaustion of this moment, and so many of us are exhausted right now. There is something about the call of, in my case, my son, but like the call of this moment that even when I'm tired, I'm like, I have to get up and play with those toy cars and make them move, or else he's gonna keep saying mama up, right? And so my question that I'm holding really closely is, what are the resources that allow us to both have the moments where I just need to be in bed, reading on my phone and sipping my tea, but also what is the motivation that allows us to get up again? And so I'm holding a lot of those questions in this season and knowing that I don't have the answers myself.
You talk about the need for our institutions to shift perhaps into, or at least consider, creating a culture of care where you can be seen as Reverend Jen Bailey and as Mama Up, right? So what, if you were to imagine what that looks like, what does that look like to you? Could you come up with one example where you would feel welcomed into a space that is fostering that type of care?
Yeah, so my husband teaches at Vanderbilt University and had me come guest lecture for free, because sometimes you come and guest lecture for free, with one of my colleagues. And it was a class on meditation and mindfulness and social movements. And one of his students asked me, because they had been talking about mindfulness in the workplace the week before, what does it mean to like create a workplace that is mindful and I was like, oh, wait, I'm an employer, right? So I want to answer that question from a real way, because as somebody who is an employer, who has a team that relies on me to get their health insurance paid, and I think it's about creating environments that allow for, we have unlimited sick days at Faith Matters Network. We allow folks, when we were trying to come up with our time off policy, we didn't look at the standard in the state of Tennessee, which isn't great, right? We looked at the Netherlands. We've begun conversations about what it would look like to have seasons of rest. So we shut down the office for 2 weeks at the end of the year. We have sabbatical funds and Sabbath funds for our team. And all of that are ways of us being able to say to our staff and our team and my colleagues, like, we care about your whole person. And if you need a break to do this work, take it. And it's okay, because if you need to step back, there's somebody that's going to step up. And when that person needs to step back, there's somebody else that can step in. And when I tell you my team is more efficient than a lot of other folks that I know at achieving the aims that they set for themselves, I think it's because we aspire to collectively treat one another as human in the fullness and mess of our lives. We done had babies and divorces during the pandemic and held one another in all of that. And so I take that really seriously as an employer, as somebody who's responsible for making sure that I'm creating a culture within the workplace that sees people in the fullness of who they are. So it's a very practical answer to your question, but it was like an epiphany for me that I was like, oh yeah, I think about myself as like part of a collaborative community, but I'm like, oh, but I'm still their boss. And like, that's a real thing. And that's a real power to hold. And so, for all the bosses in the room, I'd be happy to share like our strategies and our policies, because I think they're really good and could be better. And that's the other thing we incorporate, is a constant process of feedback to make sure that what we're doing actually is meeting folks' needs.
Has anything not worked that you thought would work?
Ooh, yes. I'm like, how much of my business do I want to tell in this?
Just one example.
Yeah, I'm going to give you an example. You want to talk about this? It's still tender. We are like a really well-versed organization. We have all the lingo of all the social justice healers, right? We had an incident where somebody in the community, there was a violation, and we tried to do a restorative process, and we did all the right things. We read all the books. We hired the facilitator, and we brought them in, and we thought that we could do this process, and we could incorporate this person back into the community, and it didn't work. There are a lot of reasons why I think it didn't work, but if I was going to take my stuff, I can't talk about other folks, but my stuff, sometimes I think we rush to a place of trying to reconcile or repair without folks having the space and time to do their own healing. And so for us, that was a very practical thing that we were experiencing internally that was really painful. And it was ultimately, we thought people would come back in the same role, but the healing wasn't able to happen because there hadn't been enough time yet. And I think we might have rushed into a process that we weren't quite ready for yet. We thought we were ready. We read the books, we'd done the things, we'd taken the time, the weeks to prepare. And so that was a really big lesson for me around so often we try to jump to solutions or move through solutions to a place of healing or want to heal, when really what we need sometimes is just time, the gift of time to do our work, to sit in it. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
It was messy, and painful, messy and painful and personal and all of those things. And my therapist got big race throughout that process. And I wish that person well, blessings, and I'm glad they're over here and not right here, right? Because I think it'll even take longer time to recover from what that process was.
I think, first of all, thank you for sharing what didn't work as well as what has worked, because we are raised in this country in a culture of we are successful at what we do. And you know what? We are, but we are because sometimes we get it wrong.
Yeah.
So I love to hear that from you. And also, obviously, you took some learnings from it. And I'm guessing you'll apply them because that's the type of person you are.
I will. I was talking to Elder the other day who was had walked with me through all of this, because I was talking to all my elders, y'all, am I losing my mind? Is it me? Trying to have some accountability. And she's like, well, baby, you don't know what the lesson's going to be yet. Just keep living. And I was like, that is so unsatisfying. So true.
I am mindful of the word elder at this point in my life. But you write with such power and beauty about intergenerational relationships. So this is a three-part question, but I want to ask it all at once so you can do with it what you will. Why are those important to you? Intergenerational relationships. What's the this for that? What's the exchange? Why are they so hard?
Yeah. So I have my big answer, then I'm going to give you my small answer, which is we are facing several generational issues at the same time, right? We have the threat of climate change. There are questions about the future of our democracy. And here's the thing. I'm now in my mid-30s and I'm a millennial and I don't have all the answers. And
You're supposed to. You're here.
I'm
right now.
here, right? Like I don't have all the answers. And the thing is, when we have challenges that are this big, it's gonna require the wisdom, creativity, energy, experience, and knowledge of everybody, in both elders, my senior saints, and my playground prophets, right? Like even Max at 19 months old and his mama up, right? Like has some wisdom to share in this season, because here's the truth, none of us know. And I feel like if we could just get more comfortable in admitting our unknowing about the state of affairs that we find ourselves in collectively as a global community, it would be much better, because then we could surface what solutions might look like. And so that's one of the technical reasons that, I don't know, but you might, and you might. So if we put our genius together, maybe we can create a new vision for something that looks different than what's broken and not working. But on a very practical level, it is in intergenerational relationships that I came to know myself. I talk about this a little bit in the book, but it was Sister Catherine Weldon who at 6 told me I was going to preach, right? Like I didn't think I was going to preach. I didn't know what she was talking about. But that's the beauty about being in relationship and in community with folks who are across generations, is that they see something in you that you might not see in yourself. In the same way that I've found young folks speak truth in a very clear way that we have been socialized out of. And so that is really the work of my heart in this season, is thinking about how we do that. And I think, to answer your question about what's so hard about it, I'm reflecting on a really beautiful conversation that I had a couple years ago with Ruby Sales, who's a veteran of the Southern freedom struggle and freedom movement. And we were talking on stage, I was interviewing her for an event, about what had been transferred and not transferred to this generation of young Black activists. And what she said to me is, we sent you all out there on the battlefield without the tools, because in my segregated hometown, I had Black teachers, Black doctors, and people who told me that I was beloved and smart. But one of the challenges of the integration project is we interpreted that as separation, which meant that folks went to different parts of town and weren't in community any longer. And so part of what I think makes it difficult, and I'll talk about my own family, because I won't watch yours, but mine has secrets, is that my grandmother didn't share with me some of the traumas of her childhood out of a desire to protect me. So I didn't know there was a lynching in her hometown right next door when she was 10, 11, until I started doing research about her hometown for the book. I didn't know, well, let me not tell Big Granny, but Granny had a history, had a story, right? But I think that desire to protect can sometimes prevent us from the honest truth-telling that is necessary, and vulnerability that is necessary to do the transformative work of relationship building across generations. We hold stuff really dear and very close out of a desire, and I get it now in a way I didn't when I was younger, when I was just mad because I got a baby now, like that desire to protect and shield.
Yeah.
But the best thing I think I can do for Max, I'm learning, is to be real with Max in an age-appropriate way, right? To not present myself as, I know I'm gonna be Superwoman for a long time because, he still needs me for food and sustenance and shelter. But to have honest conversations about my shortcomings and say I don't know, and to understand him as my teacher as much as I am his teacher, feels important. To know when to apologize when I do wrong. Like that was not something I grew up with. The idea of apologizing to a 19-month-old didn't make sense in my family system. But those are the work of repair, intergenerational repair, I think starts with a type of truth-telling, honesty, and vulnerability that requires folks to get close to their own stories again, which isn't always easy. And so that's one of the things I've been stewing on lately, is just thinking about what it would look like to create the conditions that allow people to step into the fullness of their story, to be able to name it for themselves in their own healing. And we know that our healing can be passed down in the same way that trauma is imprinted in our DNA. I made the commitment a long time ago that if I was going to have a kid, I was going to do my work.
Yeah.
So I didn't pass on to him the stuff that I inherited that was not useful for me.
You said that sometimes people hold those stories close because they're trying to protect. Do you think that underlies why we've had such a difficult time getting our nation to tell the truth of our story?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Because telling the truth about one story might mean telling the truth about what grandmama was really like in my case, right? Might be I think about those images from the civil rights movement of, crowds of like grown folks screaming at kids who are integrating public schools. And we might know the name of that kid, but like, that was somebody's auntie, right, who was screaming at that child. And so I think that one of the lessons that I've been thinking about a lot lately, got an email from a friend who was talking about how one of the reasons why she believes that people have been so successful in recruiting people into sort of this framework of division and I might call it regressive thinking around communities of belonging, or recruiting them into communities of belonging that don't have a pluralistic vision for our future, is that they feel like they belong there and they're loved there. So what would it look like in conversations and spaces where we're trying to wrestle with what it means to be a multiracial, multi-faith democracy, if rather than seeing people who disagree with us as opponents, what if we addressed them as beloveds, right? As dears, and thought about them as part of a broader community. I believe it when I talk about collective liberation, we need to liberate everybody. A lot of us don't actually mean that. And we also have to be honest about that, right? And so I think part of the work that we are embarking upon, hopefully in this season, those of us who are brave enough to do so, is speaking truth to power and being willing to say what we know and what we don't know.
I'm going to steal one of Zina's questions. Let's talk about bridge building. I can do it by magic. Yeah. So it was a perfect segue, really, to talk about bridge building, because we're talking about the divisiveness in our nation and what attracts us to wanting to feel like we belong to something, and sometimes that belonging looks like this, and sometimes it looks like that. How do we bring that together so that we're all walking along the same bridge to the same destination of belonging land? Yes. And it's a beautiful, place that we can hang out together. Sometimes we use this word casually, but you're very intentional about the language that you use and the meanings behind them. What does bridge building mean to you?
Yeah. I have such a complicated relationship with bridge building because I feel like it's become the buzzword of the moment. And so when I think about bridge building, I think about, and I read about this a little bit in the book, like, let's get real specific about what we mean. A bridge is a beautiful metaphor, but what are you bridging to? Is there a common destination in mind? Are you working on a common or shared goal? What's the vision on the other side of that bridge? John Powell from the Othering and Belonging Institute talks about the length of your bridge. It's sometimes harder to cross a short bridge than it is a long one, depending on the mechanics, and depending on are you walking? Are you driving? What's your bridge made of? If you're gonna talk about issues of racial justice, for example, like you might need a bridge made of steel because there's a lot of stuff there versus one made of wood. And what are you bridging over? So what is it that we are not attending to in our attempts to do collaborative work across lines of difference? Because you still gotta look over the bridge and see that stuff, or the destination doesn't feel as fruitful or as deep. And so when I think about bridge building, in our work at Faith Matters Network, we've actually been kind of shying away from that term, even though we use it when we're talking to funders to describe the moment, right? And have been embracing language around things like radical hospitality as a condition for building a common and shared vision for wherever it is we're heading, thinking about imagination in a new way. Because one thing that feels really clear to me, one of my teachers about this is my colleague, Reverend Margaret Ernst, who works at Faith Matters Network. She's been talking about democracy as a spiritual practice. And that what that means is that we're trying to envision something that doesn't yet exist and trying to build it and breathe it into being. And so we've been doing this American project for a while with some real success and some real challenges. And it's very clear the systems that brought us thus far are not going to be the systems that bring us in and institutions that take us into the future, because they're buckling in this moment. And so I feel really curious about a type of bridge building or work that invites us to imagine beyond the realm of the immediate, something completely different. This is another thing Max has taught me. Did y'all know, like, unicorns are real? Like the sky can be purple and pink and blue and green. And he's drawing and coloring in his pictures. What would it look like for us to imagine that unicorns were real again, right? What would it look like for us to step outside of the conventional box of what we deem to be possible and just think creatively about something that seems completely out of this world? Because I think those are the type of solutions that will help us in this moment build the type of democratic norms and practices and communities that we want to build.
Your language was put our genius together to do that.
Yeah.
Do you want to go next?
Yes.
Okay. I could feel that. Could you feel that vibe? Don't get in her way.
We are ending our time in this part of our conversation tonight, and so I do have a final question that I'm asking both Jen and Zina, which is why I wanted to be the one to ask it.
Okay.
So let's talk about finding our own roles in change, in the imagining, in this bridging, in the new definition of what bridge building is, as we can let ourselves wonder. In your book, Jen, you share Deepa Iyer's list of 10 roles in building movements. Friends, we've also included these on the back side of your placemat, so if you flip them over and read along, you can see. Jen quotes Iyer saying, "Not all of us can or should play each of these roles. An effective movement ecosystem, the imagination, experiment, requires different actors to play these roles. Before we ask everyone here to reflect and answer for ourselves, can we read through these and ask you, Jen and Zina, how you identify? Or maybe there's something on here that you've imagined for yourself that's not listed. We have weavers, experimenters, frontline responders, visionaries, builders, caregivers, disruptors, healers, storytellers, guides. All of these roles in the idea of the imagining of what we can be with regards to a beloved community and a place of belonging."
There's a little book by a gentleman whose name is Marcus Buckingham. Some of you will have known him from the GLS. The book is called The Truth About You. And in that book, he describes the difference in what you're good at and what you're called to. And they're not always the same. You get pigeonholed at what you're good at, but that may not be the thing to which you're called. Because of my grandfather, I am a great storyteller. Folks have been subject to that for 3 years. Maybe I shouldn't say great. I'm a storyteller.
Hold on, yes, yes.
Right. But what I'm called to is caregiving. And I know it because at the end of the day, when you've worked 48 hours in a 24-hour period, you feel gratified. And that's how you know when you are not depleted, but you're strengthened by the thing that you do.
Ooh, wisdom. I think, as I look at the list now, I think I'm being called to weaving in this season of my life. And I remember I did some like personality test. I don't know what it was, Clifton Strengths maybe or something. And my number one was connectivity. And I was really confused by that because I thought it might be, empathy or creativity or something. But I think if I look back over my life and I think things over, I'm like about to sing a song, a church song, I can truly say, I have a testimony. That one of the things that has been consistent, I think about me throughout my life, and I'm 34, y'all. I don't know. I'm still learning myself. In the midst of this, has been my ability to see the connection between things that other folks haven't necessarily seen. And I think that this season is calling for weavers who are standing sort of on the edges and the precipices and can say, but yes, you person over there and you person over there, you may be speaking a different language, but I think if you got together, you'd really vibe, right? So maybe what I'm saying is I've been called to be a matchmaker of sorts.
Yes.
But I think weaving feels like what feels most true to me in this season.
Jess, you don't get off the
Yeah.
hook.
I haven't looked at them again. I need more time. I don't know.
We're going to ask you at the end, too, so just know that that's coming.
I'm not giving my answer just yet because we're running out of time. I'm going to get very serious about our time now. Let me think about it.
Okay. Okay.
So we're going to break out for, now it's going to be probably 40 minutes of dialogues at our tables. So on your placemats, which Claire beautifully designed for us, there are questions, and they are sorted into 3 categories: past, present, and future. And these are questions that come from Jen's book. So I am going to have her read the questions to you. But if you can take about 15 minutes on each question, and if you can assign someone at your table to please be a timekeeper and just kind of keep everything flowing, that would be great. Yes, homework, Paul. This is interactive. We'll come back together to share out and close our evening together, but before you get chatting, Jen's going to read the questions for us.
Yeah, so I might invite each person at the table to answer one in each category. That might be one way, whichever one is speaking to you the most. So pass, tell a story from your upbringing about your earliest experience with community. What was positive in this, and what can you now see as missing? How does this set up your own hopes for building community? Present, what makes you feel deeply alive? What is the vision of hope that sustains you? How do you practice hope in your life each day? Then future. This one's fun. Imagine that you're talking to your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren. What story do you want to be able to tell them about what you did in this moment and the story of building a more inclusive community and country?
How many of us don't have to imagine? Because they're here.
Okay. Thank you, Jen.
Following the script. Does anyone have questions for Jen? Oh, I know better than that in this room.
Well, I was going to say, okay, now you can do your thing if no one has questions.
Is there?
Yes, Stephanie. Hold on, Stephanie. I'm bringing you the mic.
You talked about healing and also repairing. Can you explain to you what is the difference between healing and repairing?
Yeah, so healing to me is a continual process that is not a destination to be reached, but is a part of the muscle that we're always in. So we are always embracing a healing. There's something for us to be healed from or with. Where repair to me feels like a technical thing. So if there's a violation that has happened between me and you, we can work towards repair, and hopefully that repair will lead towards healing. But sometimes that repair might not, right? And so to me, that's kind of the distinction, is that one feels like a lifelong journey that we're on, that reveals itself more and more depending on where we're at in our journey, where one feels like a more technical interaction. I could be wrong, though. I'm always open to being wrong.
You use it when you say recover, repair, reimagine?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yeah, so in the book I talk about there's a there's a letter that I write to what I call clergy on the edge or ministers on the edge, aka those of us who don't have regular parish jobs, who are trying to sort of reimagine what spiritual leadership looks like. And as we're thinking through what might come next, I talk in the book about 3 frameworks for that. There's recovering, so going back and thinking about the image of the Sankofa bird that like is in a West African proverb, is an image of a bird whose neck is facing backwards and holding an egg. And so the concept is you got to go back and fetch what you forgot in order to fly forward. And so there's a remembering process that's about that and recovering some of this ancestral wisdom that we've left behind in our journey forward. So there's that aspect of it. Repairing is that process and getting into the discipline of trying to come together as a practice. And what was it? Reimagine, yes, thank you. And then reimagine is kind of what I've been pointing to all night, which is that maybe it's because I think we've been spending a lot of time in our culture focused on what's dying and not enough attention on what wants to emerge and what's like on the precipice. But what would happen again if we start to invest a lot of our time and energy into thinking about what's possible instead of spending so much energy on what our limitations are? What would happen if we think, again, unicorns are real in Max's world, right? And that possibility.
Unicorns are in the King James Bible 9 times. Really? Yes. If you have a King James Bible, you can find the word unicorn in it 9 times.
Thank you for that trivia. Claire has a question.
Yeah.
This is Claire, by the way, for people who don't know Claire.
I'm excited tonight too. I'm a big fan of everyone here. Is this on?
Yeah, just
Is
talk
on?
into it.
Okay. Jen.
Hi, Claire.
One of the things I love about you is you have been a convener of like affinity spaces and I don't know, what do you call bridge building spaces? So bringing people's supper, what would
Yeah.
you call that as a space?
We called them healing and bridging suppers in the beginning.
Healing
So yeah, the affinity spaces were about that process of healing.
How do you make the choice in how you spend your time? Do you think of it as seasonal, where you want to lean in more, and what is needed for you and your community at that moment? How do you, or do you like to hold both of those things at the same time? When I think of my own pie chart of time and energy and investment, I always want to keep one foot in each. So there's my spaces where I might gather with women who are similar in age, similar in value, similar, but then there's also times that I want to very intentionally be in spaces with people who are different from me. How do you think about that in your work?
Oh, that's a good question. So I got the answer my bishop would like to hear, which
Oh,
is
dear.
it's in my prayer life, right? That discernment. But I think in order to show up in the bridging spaces, you have to have those affinity spaces. And that could be a formal space, or it could be the group chat, right? Like that you have with your best friends. Because I think in order for us to be able to show up in the fullness of who we are in these bridging spaces that can sometimes be really taxing, right? It can take a lot of energy and time and effort. You gotta know where you get your cup filled back up. And that could be through music, that could be through dance, that could be going to get a drink with your best friend, right? That those spaces are necessary and I think have to happen in order for folks to be able to show up more authentically and with their full selves in those bridging spaces as well. It could be your church community that feeds you and pours into you and is a space of affinity for you. And so that's the answer. I think it has to be, in order to effectively do bridging, you have to have that space. But then I really appreciate your question about the pie chart, because there's only, it's 100% in a pie chart. You can't have 120%. And so that's where I think that question of discernment, and so I was kidding about my prayer life, but I'm not kidding about my prayer life there. And really attending to, where am I being called in this season to spend more of my time? Right now, my pie chart is at 75% at all times because, again, there's a little creature that really wants to take up all 100% of it, right? which just means that like I just don't have it. I don't have the time to give because he's only going to be 19 months once.
Right.
This is my first night away from him, y'all. I'm really excited to be doing it with you. Really grateful for it. And it sounds like bedtime went okay. I haven't gotten any panicked messages. And so I think maybe that's part of the assessment. One of the things I like about these roles is that there might be one you might be more naturally inclined to or good at. There might be one that is your core role. But sometimes you might be called to be a first responder. When I was in my mid-20s and showing up at protests and would sometimes put on my collar and then put my body between protesters and police officers to mediate, right, in hot situations. I couldn't do that in 2020 when things were around George Floyd were really reaching a simmer because I was 6 months pregnant. And I knew the best way for me to protect Black life in that moment was to stay my butt at home, as my grandmother said. But not stay at home and do nothing, but it was to become, I'm looking at this, a guide, right? To counsel and advise some of the people on the street, or get some resources and redistribute them from behind a computer screen. And so part of what I love about IR's framework is that it invites us into the seasonality of our life, that sometimes we have capacity to be 75% bridge building and 25% affinity. And sometimes you need to be 90% affinity and 10% bridge building, depending on where you're at in the season.
You worry about people opting out of bridge building because it's more difficult and us shrinking into, after COVID, I hear a lot of people saying, well, now I'm aware of my time and I want to spend it with, the people that are closest to me, and I worry that people might go back being in spaces that are unfamiliar.
I'm going to say a really unpopular thing, and I'm just going to say it. I don't know that everybody's called to be a bridge builder.
Amen.
I really don't know that is, sometimes I actually think it's unethical to ask certain groups to bridge with other groups, especially when there's been a history of harm there, right? And so I think it's first discerning, are you called to this work? And if you are called to this work, who are some of your accountability buddies in your affinity spaces who help remind you that you're called to this work in the moments where it gets really hard, in the moments when you want to throw in the towel, in the moments where you're like, I'm tired, bye, right? Who are going to be able to send you that care package that helps you get rejuvenated to show up again. And so that's my reflection there.
So the part that you play tonight is we are going to read these roles, and I want you to stand just briefly, and then you'll sit back down. When you hear one that you feel is yours, I'll just leave it that way.
Can we stand more than once?
Yes, you may stand more than once. I wanted you to only stand once, but Claire told me I was being harsh. I take
Is that true?
I am capable of learning. Generous spirit. So, are you ready? So you'll stand. And please just notice who's standing with you at that moment. Okay? Weavers, please stand. All right. You may be seated. Experimenters, please stand. No, stand up for a while. We want to see, we want you to own it. All right, thank you. Frontline responders, please stand. Yeah.
Yay!
I did tell you would be president someday. Visionaries, please stand.
That's a bold thing to say, but.
Yeah. You may be seated. Builders, please stand.
Claire, you must stand up, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Thank you. Caregivers, please stand. All right, love it. I almost called somebody's name, but I didn't. Disruptors, please stand. So she stood up. Good. Thank you. Healers, please stand. Yes. Okay, thank you. Storytellers, please stand. Every clergy. Yeah. Be seated. That's true. Guides, would you stand?
I see some ladies in the back that are not standing, who I believe should be standing, Ms. Larson.
Oh, my. I don't know. Beloved. So isn't it interesting, though, that we see each other and we claim roles for people? If you know Jeannie Hansen, you know why I was going to call her name for disruptor, right? You understood that. You understood that. But just like we feel that we can name other people's roles, that happens to us in our real lives. Mm-hmm. And so you have to know your role, because you may have to stand against people who love you, who push out in a particular way, and that is not your space in this moment. So this list goes somewhere where you can see it, that I might remember what those roles are. One more quote, and then we'll close. On page 68, our author, our sister, and our friend says, "This is a time of great uncovering in which Mother Earth and Father Sky are pushing us into divine reckoning about what it means to be in right relationship." Mother Earth and Father Sky, you and I are in the middle. And there is this urging for the universe. And when I read it, I kept thinking about sides of a womb trying to give birth. And what will be given birth to is us, in the fullness of our call, in the fullness of our being. You stood up to claim a role. Mother and Father are pushing to bear you into the world. We might take a hiatus over the summer and see you back with Abby in the fall, but we do not take a hiatus from standing on the corners of our lives and in the center of the field and shining brightly in the way you are called to shine. You, beloved, are the hope of the world.
No pressure.
There isn't pressure, because we do it together. Together, we are the hope of the world. Go in peace to be born into the fullness of yourself. Join me in thanking you.
Jen Bailey, thank you.